After a decade of hard work alongside Eleanor, I finally saw our efforts pay off. We moved out of a cramped, miserable apartment and into a beautiful, expensive condominium. Then, one evening, Eleanor found something incredible. A software system that promised to send her back in time, all the way to the summer her old high school crush was still alive. Without a second thought, she threw away our multi-million-dollar fortune and clicked the confirmation button. Just like that, I was pulled back with her, finding myself in a high school classroom again. I immediately told her we were breaking up, but she didn't seem to understand the seriousness of what I was saying. "It's not a big deal, Arthur. We'll just start over. Why are you acting so dramatic?" she said, totally relaxed. "I'm serious," I replied, keeping my voice level. That only made her angry. After she went back and saved her old crush, she even applied to the same college as him. Everyone we knew who still had their memories said she was just trying to hurt me, that she wanted me to crawl back to her. But I ignored them because I knew something she didn't. The time travel was only temporary. The electronic voice in my head had told me that if you changed even one small thing in the past, the future would change along with it. 7 days later, we were back in the present. 10 years in the future. But this time, Eleanor was in for a huge shock. The college entrance exam scores had just been released, and the school was hosting a required workshop to help students choose their university majors. Being back on a college campus felt like I was stepping into a whole other life. Next to me, Eleanor was fanning herself with her hand and grumbling. "One minute it's freezing winter, the next it's boiling summer. It's so hard to get used to." I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I spoke clearly and directly. "We should break up." When she heard this, Eleanor froze completely. She clearly hadn't expected the first thing I'd do, after 10 years of a shared life, was dump her the moment we were both back in the reality we had created. As the shock faded, her eyebrows pulled together. "Arthur, what exactly did you just say?" I turned to face her, looking at a face that was suddenly 10 years younger, and forced myself to speak calmly. "I said, we are breaking up." Seeing how serious I was, Eleanor's hand movements slowed down. Confusion spread across her face. "What kind of game are you playing? We're back in high school, 10 years younger. Aren't you happy?" "Happy?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh, and then I finally lost my temper. "Eleanor, are you out of your mind? Why on earth would you want to go back to high school? We worked our whole lives for so many years to finally succeed. Have you completely forgotten all the suffering we went through?" I truly wanted to shake some sense into her. Had she lost her mind? Who in their right mind would give up the success they bled for just to go back to having absolutely nothing? I was so furious I could barely control myself, but Eleanor just looked surprised for a second before shrugging it off. "I haven't forgotten," she said in a casual, airy way. "But I had you with me the entire time, didn't I?" She paused, and I saw a shadow of sadness mixed with a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I just wanted to save Theodore. He didn't deserve to die that summer." I knew who Theodore was. He had sat in front of Eleanor in class. He had done brilliantly on his college exams, but his parents wouldn't allow him to go to university. He never even got a chance to submit his applications. In his despair, he jumped from a building and died that summer. His was a sad story, no doubt about it. I wasn't denying that, but I barely knew the guy. Why did I have to pay for someone else's life with all the years of hard work I had put in? Seeing my silence, Eleanor's patience ran out. She sounded almost amused. "It's not a big deal. We'll just start over. Why are you being so dramatic?" I took a deep breath. When I spoke again, my voice was completely emotionless. "I'm serious." Her expression changed, But before she could say another word, a clear, friendly male voice called out from behind us. "Eleanor, the workshop is about to start. We're going to be late." We both turned around. A handsome guy with a bright, open smile looked at us. A light breeze moved his hair, and the small dimples on his face were very charming. Eleanor almost instinctively took 2 steps toward him, but then she seemed to remember me and turned back, lowering her voice. "You're a grown man, not an actual 18-year-old. Stop having a fit. Just calm down and go to the workshop." With that, she hurried over to Theodore. The composed, mature woman I had known was suddenly acting like a shy, nervous teenager as she walked beside him toward the auditorium. I was left standing there, completely alone. I didn't go to the workshop. I turned around and went home. But as I sat on the bus, tears started to fall, and I couldn't stop them. 10 years, a whole decade of effort, just gone. Just like that, we were back to having nothing. A huge wave of despair threatened to drown me, bringing my memories flooding back with it. Eleanor and I had known each other since we were kids. Her family lived right next door to mine. When we were little, my parents fought about money all the time. So did hers. Whenever the fighting got too bad, we would sneak out and sit in the park, eating popsicles. We'd stay there all afternoon, and then just look at each other with silly, knowing smiles. We had so much in common that it was impossible for us not to rely on each other. After high school, we went to the same college and worked part-time jobs together. At the right time, we just naturally fell into a relationship without ever really having to use the words boyfriend and girlfriend. After graduation, we got married. We were struggling to make it, in the big city, and money was incredibly tight, so we skipped the wedding and just signed the papers. During the hardest year, we were crammed into a tiny, leaky apartment, dreaming about our future. She would rest her head on my arm, a genuine smile on her face. "When we're rich, we're going to have such a good life," she'd say. Just then, a drop of water would land with a light plink, as if making fun of our naive dreams. I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, well, I'm going to have a huge mansion." She would laugh too. "Deal." But starting a company wasn't easy at all. To get just one contract, I ran all over the city under the burning sun, got heat stroke, and even ended up in the hospital from drinking way too much with clients. But we pushed through all of it. We finally made it. We were worth tens of millions. I thought it was the start of our happy life. But one night, this strange computer system found Eleanor. It told her she could go back in time, choose any point in the past, and change it. A blue screen was floating right in front of us. At first, Eleanor didn't believe it, but the system's sudden appearance was shocking enough. I felt like something was wrong. I didn't want to go back. I frowned and tried to talk her out of it. "Don't fall for this nonsense." But I never expected that Eleanor, who had always been so rational and sensible, would hit confirm without a single moment of hesitation. In an instant, a bright white light flashed. Just before I blacked out, I heard her whisper, "If I go back, does that mean I can save him?" In that moment, my mind went completely blank. We had been in love for years, but had there always been someone else in her heart? Someone she was willing to give up a multi-million-dollar fortune for, just for a chance to go back and save him? What a ridiculous love story. I suddenly found the whole situation unbelievable, but I couldn't even manage a laugh. Just then, an electronic voice sounded inside my head. "Congratulations, host, on returning to the past. This time period is limited to 7 days. If no causal links are changed, you will return to the original future in 10 years. If changes are made, the future will also change. Note: when time travel involves more than 2 people, only one will retain their memories, chosen at random by the system." I froze. So I could go back. I turned around and headed back toward the school. It had been a 10-year relationship, after all. You can't just let go of that in an instant. When I found Eleanor, she was just coming out of the workshop, a soft smile on her lips as she chatted easily with Theodore. When she saw me, her eyes looked away for a moment. She was probably still angry about me yelling at her earlier. She turned her head away, pretending not to see me, and just said, "Let's go fill out our college applications." The us in that sentence meant her and Theodore. Theodore scratched his head, looking a little embarrassed. "Is it okay for me to go to your house?" Eleanor smiled casually. "What's wrong with that? My parents aren't home." "Well, okay then." "Eleanor," I said her name clearly. Eleanor stopped. I glanced at Theodore, who was standing there, alive, and felt a strange wave of guilt. But Theodore didn't notice my expression. He looked at Eleanor and asked quietly, "Is he a friend of yours?" We weren't in the same class. I only knew him by sight. At his question, Eleanor looked at me and said coldly, "Yeah, we're neighbors." Neighbors? I was completely stunned. An undeniable bitterness rose in my throat, and the words I wanted to say got completely stuck. It was a scorching summer day, but I felt like I couldn't feel the heat at all. Eleanor was the one to speak up. "Let's go. It's too hot out here." "Okay." Theodore waved at me. "See you later then." Eleanor didn't look back. She thoughtfully called a cab for him. She used to always tell me, "It's fine to take the crowded bus. I'll ride it with you." At the time, I just thought she was being careful with money. It turns out she could be considerate and dote on someone after all. The system's words echoed in my head, but I didn't chase after them. I went home alone. There were 3 days left until the college application deadline. In my original timeline, to avoid a long-distance relationship, I had applied to a local university with Eleanor. But later, after my career took off, and I traveled to so many places, I secretly regretted not going to a better school. Now that I had a second chance, I could choose a new path for myself. With that thought, my anger finally started to lessen. For the next 3 days, I didn't leave the house, not until the day the application deadline closed. My best friend Julian asked me to hang out. I hadn't seen his younger self in a long time, so I gladly accepted. We went to see the biggest blockbuster movie of the year. But unexpectedly, we ran into Eleanor at the movie theater. Eleanor was holding 2 tickets. Our eyes met suddenly. She froze for a second, a flash of panic in her eyes, but she quickly pulled herself together and walked toward me. "Don't get the wrong idea. Theodore has never seen a movie in a theater before, so I just wanted to bring him." I nodded calmly. "Okay." My detached attitude seemed to annoy her. She stared at me for a couple of seconds, then lowered her voice, a new sharpness to it. "Still mad? We have all our experience from the last life. We can get successful again, even faster, right? Why are you making such a huge deal out of this?" It wasn't just about that. I looked up and said quietly, "What if I told you that if you don't change anything, we can go straight back? Then we would still be husband and wife." I said it seriously, but Eleanor dismissed it. "Don't be ridiculous. We're already back. Besides, could you really stand by and let someone die? I never realized you were so cold-blooded." She had a point. I nodded. "Okay, then, do whatever you want. Fine, you make your changes. I'll make mine. We'll see what things look like in 7 days when we're back in the future." It was a small, quiet moment, not really a difficult thing to say, but Eleanor's face turned cold. "Do you have to talk to me like that?" I was about to argue when Theodore came back from the restroom. The second Eleanor saw him, she turned and walked toward him without a backward glance. Julian came back with the popcorn and saw their backs as they walked away. He looked surprised. "Isn't Eleanor your girlfriend? Why is she with Theodore?" "She's not anymore. Not now, and not in the future," I said, looking down. The moment the words left my mouth, the person walking ahead of us froze. But she didn't turn around. I didn't care. I settled in with Julian to enjoy the movie I had missed out on all those years ago. As the movie neared its end, I suddenly remembered that Julian, because of his bad grades, had skipped college and gone straight to work. In the end, his business failed. He was left with massive debt, his wife cheated on him, and he developed severe depression. Right before he killed himself, he gave me a call. On the other end of the line, he gave a bitter laugh, sounding confused. "Arthur, is a degree really that important?" I was busy with work and answered without really thinking. "It helps." He didn't seem to mind my curt reply. After a pause, he continued, "I wish I had retaken the year and tried for college." I sensed something was wrong, but by the time I dropped everything and rushed back to our hometown to find him, people told me he was already dead. He was only 27. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but glance at the energetic, youthful Julian beside me. The teenager had a neat, short haircut and was staring intently at the movie screen. Even failing his exams hadn't cast much of a shadow over him. The light from the screen reflected in his eyes, bright and full of life. "Julian," I spoke softly. "Huh?" He heard me and turned his head. I looked at him, made my decision, and controlling a wave of emotion, said, "College is great. Have you thought about studying for another year to retake the exams? We could still be together then." I remembered it clearly. He had a real talent for design. He shouldn't be stuck in this small town. Julian paused, then scratched his head. "But I'm not really cut out for studying." "No problem. I'll tutor you online." I pulled out my old corporate planning book, laying out a detailed plan for his future, and selling him on the dream. His eyes, full of a clear, honest trust, lit up. He was convinced. "Okay, I'll give it a shot." I nodded, feeling satisfied. Good. By the time the nearly 3-hour movie was over, it was already dark. Walking out of the theater with the crowd, Eleanor was strangely distracted. "Eleanor, what are you thinking about?" Theodore asked with concern, after she didn't respond to him twice. The sound of his voice snapped her back to reality. Her eyes instinctively scanned the crowd. It was packed, but she couldn't see the familiar figure she was looking for. Maybe Arthur saw a different movie, she thought. "It's nothing," she said out loud. Theodore smiled, his handsome face blushing slightly, as if he'd just thought of something. "Well, you treated me to a movie, so let me treat you to some takeout." Eleanor's brow furrowed instinctively. She hadn't eaten that kind of cheap food in a long time, and had no desire to. She was about to refuse when she thought of Arthur's deliberately distant attitude, and a fire of irritation flared up in her. It was just starting over. Did he really have to be so dramatic about it? Meeting Theodore's expectant gaze, she nodded. "Sure." The boy was clearly thrilled. His fingertips unconsciously gripped the hem of his shirt. After a few steps, he said, trying to sound casual, "Eleanor, when school starts, let's go together." Previously, Eleanor had applied to a good local university, but this time around, when filling out her applications, she figured it wouldn't hurt to see a different campus, and casually applied to the same college as Theodore. After all, she had her experience from the last lifetime. Speaking of which, she glanced at her phone, feeling an inexplicable anxiety. Still no message from Arthur. Wasn't he even going to ask what school she applied to? Or did he just apply to the local school again? The thought made most of her anger go away, but she still said, "Okay." but we'll have to bring someone else along." "Your neighbor? The guy?" Theodore asked. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then said casually, "Yeah." She hadn't completely forgiven him yet. He could stew in his own feelings for a while before she told people they were together again. That night, I heard that Eleanor had applied to the same university as Theodore. Before, I would have confronted her about it, but now I didn't care. I hadn't applied to a local university anyway. What I didn't expect, though, was a call from Eleanor, just as I was getting ready for bed. "Arthur, I posted the university I was applying to on my social feed. Did you see it?" Her tone wasn't great, but it was an attempt to make peace. I was half asleep and mumbled, "Yeah, I saw it," but I had no intention of applying to the same school. Hearing my response, the person on the other end of the line seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, muttering, "So we'll still be at the same university, just like before. Even if we do go back after 7 days, we'll still be husband and wife." Her mumbling was annoying. I hung up the phone, rolled over, and went back to sleep. The next few days passed quickly. Worried about future problems, I made a detailed plan for my current self. On the 7th day, as I was organizing my old high school notes, the system appeared. A cold electronic voice suddenly rang in my ear. "Time is up. The return channel is now. Open." My fingers paused. A draft of air blew through the room, rustling the pages of my thick notebooks. The pages, which should have been yellowed with age, were still nearly new in the summer of 10 years ago. The next moment, a blinding white light flashed before my eyes. My heart began to pound uncontrollably. What would this uncertain future look like? Meanwhile, next door, Eleanor was leaning back on a worn-out red leather sofa, fiddling with a slow, laggy phone, her brow furrowed as she refreshed the screen over and over. But the chat history remained stuck from several days ago. Was the signal bad? Or was the network unstable? She habitually blamed the internet and shook her phone in frustration. But even when the page refreshed successfully, no new messages came in. Before, Arthur would have sent her tons of messages. Simple, everyday things. He'd ask if she'd eaten. He'd ask what she was doing. But now the chat window was empty. A flicker of panic rose in her heart, but she quickly suppressed it. To be honest, now that she'd calmed down, she was having trouble adjusting too. After they got rich, they had only used the best of everything. Now she was back to living in a dilapidated little house. She had to check her balance before buying anything. A single cab ride had cost her a whole day's worth of food money. It was understandable that Arthur would be angry, but he was really holding a grudge. Eleanor rubbed her forehead in frustration. After a while, she stood up, ready to go find Arthur. But before she could take more than a few steps, a familiar white light flashed before her eyes. When the light faded and she saw the scene in front of her, the woman's gaze froze. 10 years can change a city dramatically. The once low buildings had been replaced by towering skyscrapers. Eleanor stared at the massive high-definition screen in the city center, first in shock, then in delight. She was back. Wait. What about Theodore? She pulled out her phone and quickly scrolled through her contacts. Soon, she found a familiar name. She clicked on Theodore's social media feed. There were recent photos of him wearing a cool leather jacket and riding a motorcycle. Compared to his shy, 10 years younger self, Theodore looked much more mature. She had really changed the past. But soon, Eleanor realized something was wrong. Why wasn't her phone the latest model? And her clothes? She looked down. They weren't designer brands. A strange feeling spread from the bottom of her heart. She pushed down her unease and hailed a cab straight to the mansion where she used to live. Someone was home. Eleanor's heart settled a little. Of course, this was still right. As long as she found Arthur, everything would get back on track. She knocked on the door. It took a while for someone to answer. It was winter, and the southern climate was damp and cold. A gust of wind cut through her, chilling her to the bone. Eleanor shivered, calling out impatiently, "Arthur, are you—" Her words died in her throat. A middle-aged woman had opened the door and was looking at her with confusion. "Who are you looking for?" Eleanor's eyes widened, and her throat felt tight. How could this be? After being escorted out of the villa by security, whom the woman had called, Eleanor stood dazed on the asphalt road, completely stunned. How was this possible? Hadn't she returned to 10 years in the future? Why wasn't the mansion hers anymore? And where was Arthur? Right, Arthur. She fumbled for her phone, her frozen fingers scrolling frantically through her contacts, desperate to find his name. But after looking through everyone she knew, she couldn't find him. She couldn't remember his phone number either. Cursing under her breath, she hailed another cab and went to their company. This time, it was as she expected. The company existed, but there were only a handful of people inside, and the size was completely different. An employee noticed her and gave a polite greeting. "Ms. White, where's Arthur?" She barely recognized anyone on the staff. But she couldn't worry about that now. She controlled her emotions and asked. She remembered that at this point, she and Arthur were working hard at the company together. Arthur was her vice president. He should have been at the office. Could he be out meeting clients? Before the thought could even settle, the person in front of her gave her a strange look. "Arthur? Who's that? We don't have anyone by that name here." It was like a lightning bolt had struck Eleanor. For a moment, her heart seemed to stop. It had changed. Everything had changed. Realizing this, Eleanor forced herself to calm down. After leaving the office, she started calling old classmates one by one, asking about Arthur. Someone knew. They told her casually, "Oh, Arthur. I think he and his best friend went to New York City. I hear their business is doing pretty well now." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. She suddenly remembered what Arthur had told her. If she didn't change anything, they could go back to their old future. But she had changed things. Was this the butterfly effect? But they had been together for over 10 years. Those memories of a decade of love couldn't be fake. How could he really just leave her? Swallowing hard, she fought down the intense fear in her heart. After hanging up, she started frantically scrolling through her phone. The university she had graduated from was the one she'd chosen with Theodore. She had a company, but there were only a few people in the group chat. She had no idea what her life had been like for the past 10 years. Why hadn't she become the CEO of a publicly traded company like in her previous life? She should have had more experience. She had to go ask Arthur. When the receptionist buzzed up to tell me someone claiming to be my girlfriend was here to see me, I was having lunch with Julian. Hearing this, Julian froze, his eyes wide. "Bro, when did you get a girlfriend behind my back?" I was just as confused. "I don't have one." "Really?" Julian clearly didn't believe me. He put down his chopsticks and started questioning me. "Is it the cat-eyed girl?" He was talking about the college student next door who had these incredibly clear, cat-like eyes. I shook my head. "Then is it the Chanel lady?" A rich heiress who was pursuing me loved sending me Chanel gifts. I shook my head again. "Then who?" He rattled off a whole list of names, and my face darkened. I was busy as hell. I barely knew most of those people. Seeing me deny everything, Julian grinned, stood up, and abandoned his lunch. "Well, I've got to see who's trying to claim our CEO." I was curious too, so I told the receptionist to let her up. Soon, a beautiful young woman was standing before us. I recognized her instantly. It was my childhood friend, Eleanor. Seeing me, she was clearly agitated. She walked quickly over and grabbed my shoulders. "Arthur, what the hell is going on? What happened to our home?" I had no idea what she was talking about. Beside me, Julian squinted. Then recognition dawned. Well, look who it is. If it isn't the childhood sweetheart from 100 years ago." Eleanor ignored Julian's sarcastic remark, her bloodshot eyes fixed on me. I pushed her hands off and took a step back, frowning. "Eleanor, what are you talking about? We broke up 10 years ago." The moment the words left my mouth, the color drained from her face. Meeting my unfamiliar gaze, Eleanor's eyes shook violently, and her lips trembled as she repeated, "Broke up 10 years ago?" I didn't say anything. But Julian piped up. "Hey, weren't you getting pretty close with Theodore back then? What, you two didn't end up together?" I listened calmly, showing no reaction. Hearing this, Eleanor seemed to snap back to reality. Her expression relaxed, and she explained, "Are you still holding a grudge? It was only for 7 days. There was nothing between me and Theodore." A grudge? 7 days? I couldn't understand why Eleanor would show up after 10 years and start spouting a bunch of nonsense. But I had heard from a classmate that after graduating from college, Eleanor had gone to LA to start a business, but it hadn't gone well. She wasn't professional enough, and few companies were willing to work with her. An ex-girlfriend showing up out of the blue. Was she here to borrow money? My expression grew complicated. "Just say it. How much do you need to borrow?" I cut off her rambling. Caught off guard, Eleanor stared at me. "What?" I was getting exasperated. "Eleanor, for old time's sake, I can help you out once. But you need to understand we have nothing to do with each other anymore. Don't come to me for money again." That was probably a little harsh. The woman bristled. "Arthur, how long are you going to keep up this act? We're married." Before she could finish, a sweet, clear voice interrupted. "Sorry to interrupt." Everyone turned. A tall, young college student stood in the doorway. With her broad shoulders and narrow waist, she looked energetic and beautiful, even in a simple t-shirt and pants. Her cat-like eyes were clear and bright. What was Isabel doing here? I was taken aback. Ever since I started working, if I didn't eat with Julian, I'd often forget to eat at all, leaving my stomach in knots. But after I met Isabel, who lived next door, she started bringing me snacks and food. We got to know each other over time. Seeing the office full of people, Isabel wasn't awkward at all. She walked in calmly with a container and said naturally, "I brought you some fruit. It's not good for you to never eat any. What time do you get off work today? I bought pork ribs. I can make you sweet and sour ribs." My face felt hot, but I couldn't just ignore her. I mumbled, "Around 6, I guess." Julian was grinning, trying to hide his laughter. Eleanor just stared, and it took her a long moment to process what was happening. "You cheated on me?" she asked in disbelief. The room fell into a dead silence. Even with the tough skin I'd developed over the years, Eleanor's question completely floored me. Was she crazy? What the hell? If I could, I'd go back a few minutes and tell the receptionist to throw her out. Isabel's brow furrowed slightly, her gaze assessing Eleanor with a critical eye. Julian was stunned for a few seconds, then looked at Eleanor like she was insane. "Eleanor, you and Arthur broke up over a decade ago. How is that cheating? Are you dreaming?" Eleanor glared at Julian. "We were married. I even know where all the moles on his body are." Her voice was loud enough for the employees passing by in the hall to start peeking in. My expression froze. A strange wave of sadness welled up inside me. but it was immediately replaced by cold indifference. "Eleanor, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we really did break up a long time ago, and I would never have married you. If you don't believe me, check your own marriage records." "Fine, I will." Eleanor pulled out her phone. Time ticked by. Her face went from flushed to pale. In the end, she kept refreshing the screen over and over, muttering, "It's impossible. It has to be here. I remember we got our license right after we graduated college. We didn't have a wedding then." I had a reasonable suspicion that her business failing had driven her insane. So I decisively called security to have her removed. But it would take a few minutes for them to arrive. Eleanor suddenly turned back to me, her eyes red-rimmed. "You really forgot everything?" What was I supposed to have forgotten? My patience was gone. "I haven't forgotten anything." Just as she was about to walk toward me, a tall figure stepped in front of me and slapped her across the face without hesitation. Eleanor stumbled and fell to the ground, caught completely off guard. Isabel didn't look back. She just shielded me, her voice tense. "Be careful. This person might have mental problems." She had a point. I remembered everything perfectly. After high school, I got into my dream university out of state and studied management. During college, I tutored Julian whenever I had free time. In 1 year, I helped him raise his score from the 400s to over 600. He became my underclassman. The year we graduated, I applied for a startup grant, and Julian and I launched a clothing company together. Julian had a real talent for design, so he was in charge of the clothes while I handled marketing. From just a few orders at the beginning, we eventually built our own brand. We grew the business step by step. Sometimes, looking back, Julian would get sentimental. "If you hadn't insisted I go to college back then, I'd probably be married with kids back in our hometown right now." I had forgotten why I was so insistent about it, but hearing him say that, I would just smile and reply, "The future will be even better." "Yeah." Julian's face would relax into a smile, shining with youthful confidence. My trip down memory lane ended there. I didn't feel like I had forgotten anything, and if I had, it must not have been important. Once Eleanor was taken away, the office returned to its usual quiet. Julian muttered angrily, "Seriously, a good ex is a dead ex." I pursed my lips and said nothing. Isabel left after dropping off the fruit, without asking any questions. Even though I didn't care about Eleanor anymore, my good mood had been ruined. After work, Isabel came to pick me up, and she even brought my favorite wisteria flowers. As she handed them to me, the tips of her ears turned red. Seeing this, Julian gave me a knowing wink and whispered, "Your neighbor girl looks all cool and distant, but she's actually really thoughtful." I couldn't help but smile. "All right, I'm heading out. Bye." Julian waved. Isabel started the car, and the figures outside the window began to move away. I saw Julian's reflection in the rearview mirror as he turned and went back into the office, and I let out a small sigh. He had zero interest in getting married. He was even more of a workaholic than I was. But that was a good thing. "What else do you want to eat tonight?" a voice suddenly asked beside me. I turned my head. We were at a red light, and Isabel was looking at me. I thought she would ask about Eleanor, but I didn't expect her to ask about dinner. "Anything's fine," I said casually. "Okay. How about stir-fried tomatoes and eggs, sweet and sour pork ribs, and loofah soup?" "Mm-hmm." The light turned green. Isabel turned her head back and focused on driving. I stared at her profile, my mouth opening and closing, but in the end, I said nothing. Honestly, I hadn't planned on getting too involved with Isabel. My parents' failed marriage had left me with a deep distrust of the institution, and the childhood friend I had once relied on so much had also become an ex. I had resigned myself to the idea that I would spend my life married to my career. I had even told Isabel that. But Isabel hadn't given up. She said feelings could be nurtured over time. If 5 years wasn't enough, she'd take 10. She cooked for me every day and would clean my apartment when I was too lazy. She gently worked her way into every corner of my life. Lost in my thoughts, I realized the car had stopped. "We're home." Hearing her voice, I snapped out of it and followed her into the elevator. While she was making dinner, my phone buzzed with a friend request. It was Eleanor. I hit decline, but she was persistent, sending request after request. Finally annoyed, I accepted. Her status immediately changed to typing. "Arthur, there was really nothing between me and Theodore. That again. As if I cared." I replied, "What does that have to do with me?" Then, I blocked her. About half an hour later, Isabel's dinner was ready. The aroma wafted out, and I lost interest in my phone. I went to the kitchen and leaned against the doorframe, watching the tall girl in an apron. I smiled and teased, "You know, you've got a real wifey vibe going on." "Do I?" Isabel turned around. Beneath her dark hair, her eyes were bright, like a kitten that had just been praised by its owner. I had the sudden urge to pat her head. As if sensing my thought, she tilted her head up slightly, a smile in her eyes. My heart skipped a beat. I reached out and ruffled her hair. Her hair was so soft and felt nice to the touch. Satisfied, I couldn't help but smile as I helped her carry the dishes. "Let's eat." "Okay." After dinner, I curled up on the sofa to watch TV, not really paying attention, just flipping through channels. It was my way of relaxing. Isabel came out after washing the dishes and sat down naturally beside me. I waited for a moment, but when she didn't say anything, I asked on an impulse, "Aren't you curious about that woman from today?" Even though what Eleanor said was nonsense, she had been so determined, as if we really had been married and had a history. The person beside me thought for a moment. "I don't know her, but I trust you. Of course, if you want to tell me, I'm willing to listen." I turned my head to look at her and met her serious gaze. After a moment, I chuckled. "I've never been married. That was my childhood friend. We broke up 10 years ago." "Okay." Just a single word, but it was filled with trust. I was speechless for a moment. What was I going to do? She was actually pretty great, the kind of great that made you want to tease her. And I did tease her. On the sofa, I pinned Isabel beneath me, staring straight into her eyes before lightly biting her lip. I was 28, after all, not some kid. I felt a little awkward, but I was used to being in charge and always wanted to be on top. Her breath hitched, her cheeks flushed, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. "I want a title. We'll see how you perform." She was only a senior in college, 22, young and beautiful. Soon she responded with enthusiasm. Our lips and tongues tangled. A glistening thread of saliva connected us. Eventually, I regained control. She was beneath me, her eyes shimmering, but she was firmly in my grasp with no escape. Until we both reached the peak. Isabel and I officially started dating. A year later, we got our marriage license. I hadn't wanted a big wedding, but she insisted. For weeks, Isabel bustled around, finalizing every detail, even hiring a designer to create her wedding dress. I was exasperated, but it was impossible not to be moved. Julian was my best man. He grinned and said, "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness." I smiled and accepted his blessing, then threw the bouquet to him. Not because I wanted him to get married soon. There are a million roses in the world. I just hoped he would always be himself, as free as the wind, and as passionate as fire. Eleanor's story. The message Eleanor sent was met with a red exclamation mark. She stared blankly at the screen, sitting in her rented apartment, lost in thought. Her phone buzzed again. She quickly looked down. It was from Theodore. "Theodore. Eleanor, want to hang out?" Eleanor stared at the message, her memory still stuck in that summer 10 years ago. She had long since sensed that Theodore had a crush on her. To be honest, she wasn't completely indifferent. Before going back in time, she had even thought that if she could do it all over again, she would have dated Theodore. The unattainable first love of her youth had become a lingering regret after she became successful. So, when she really did go back, she had a selfish desire to be good to Theodore. But when it came to marriage, she still wanted Arthur. She and Arthur had grown up together. They were the people each other trusted and relied on the most. Moreover, they had been through so much together. She believed Arthur would never leave her. Back then, they were crammed into a tiny apartment with no wedding and no rings, nothing, just a leaky roof. But Arthur would let her rest her head on his arm and dream about the future with him. But she never expected it. Arthur's words, "Not now, and not in the future." They had come true. It turned out the time travel had a limit. They had returned to 10 years later together, but everything had changed. Eleanor tried to recall the professional knowledge she had learned back then, but her mind was a complete blank. A sudden panic seized her heart. A terrifying thought exploded in her mind, making her scalp tingle. They had indeed gone back to that time, but it wasn't a rebirth. They had returned as their 10 years older selves to make different decisions for their 10 years younger selves. Her younger self didn't have any so-called experience of success, but her life had been altered by the new decisions. Even if she had started a company just like before, it would have been difficult to succeed. As for her supposed experience, the reason she had reached the peak of success wasn't just her own efforts. It was also Arthur's decade of unwavering support, giving her hope the countless times she wanted to give up. Realizing this, she suddenly buried her head in her hands and began to sob painfully. If she could, she wished she could go back to the moment Arthur warned her not to trust the system. She would never have chosen to agree.